If there's one thing that really puts me off doing landscape photography, it is the wind, and it's extremely windy today, so I thought I would stay in the office and give you some tips about how you can simplify your images and improve them. I'm going to talk a little bit about composition as well. So, I'm Adam, this is First Man Photography, let's go! The one thing virtually all my workshop clients are looking to improve on is composition, and a good way to do that is to simplify your image. So I wanted to give you these 5 tips to help you do that. Generally speaking, simplifying things is a good thing anyway, and it's true in photography as well, but we're not really thinking about removing things from images and making it a plain image. What we're actually talking about is simplifying the story, and to do that, you first need to know what the story is. What are you trying to convey to the viewer? What emotions are you trying to evoke? What is your story? That's where the art comes from. That's where it becomes your work and your experience of that landscape. Being in touch with your feelings is an important part of this. It's not always easy, but it's definitely worth giving it a try. When we arrive at the scene, the first thing we want to think about is pretty much the stuff we talked about last week. What is your subject? Where is the good light? What are the interesting things in the scene in front of you? Once we've done that, we're then starting to think about composition, and it's here where we really want to start to try and simplify the image. Now, the first one, just because I absolutely love it, is to use long exposure. So we've got a few images here, and this is the first one. It's a image of a small town on the west coast of Scotland called Glenelg, and it's kind of fairly isolated through this mountain road, and the whole village has a feel that people are just doing what they need to do to get by. It has a slightly industrial feel, but it's also set in an absolutely beautiful landscape, and that's the emotion and the feeling I was trying to evoke. There are a few things that are working for this image to really make that story work and make the image work. Firstly, it has leading lines of this jetty which just lead you nicely up to the mountain in the middle there, and that mountain is also kind of framed by these ones at the side that don't have quite as much snow. Now, long exposure is what I've used here. This is about 2.5 minutes, I think. What it does with the long exposure is just remove the detail from the water and the sky, and that just places focus back down into the jetty and the mountain, which is what the story is all about. If we just flick over to the test exposure that I took, you can see how that's working for you, because there's a lot more detail in the water. It's quite smooth anyway and quite interesting, but that's just not what the story was about. So I have simplified that and removed that little hair that was on the sensor as well, and it's just made it a much better image. What I've also done in this image is to make it black and white, and that is another way, an extra way, that we can simplify our images as well. It doesn't mean every black and white image will simplify, because it's got to work for the image. If we flick back to this color image, the color is detracting from the story here, because you've kind of got the browns and the white, and it isn't a particularly colorful image, but the mornings, that nice soft morning light has produced some beautiful tones in the image. And if you look at the light on the metal here and on the hills as well, and the reflections, when you make that into a black and white, it's just picked up those tones so beautifully, and I just think it works really well. I've then added a blue tone as well, and again, that was to further that story of that industrial, cold, winter's day feeling, and that's why I think that story works. Now, the second way of simplifying our images is to use negative space, and all that is a bit like this image here, where you've got a large amount of background and one color often that just puts all the emphasis back on to the sort of subject of your image. And here, the subject of my image are these groins here. This is at Spurn Point, which is on the east coast of England. It's very remote, very isolated, and a little bit neglected, and that's the sort of emotion I wanted to evoke here. So I've again used a long exposure as well, and it's just created this sort of white area all around the image here, and then all that focus goes back on to these groins, and you can see how they're broken, they're tipping over, and it gives that kind of feeling of being a bit rejected and not looked after. Now, the third way is to isolate the subject. This is a really important one because it's used in so much of photography. If you think about portrait photography, we can do that by blowing out the background and having a nice blurred bokeh background, or in the studio setting, we have a plain white, grey or black background or a colour one. It can also work in landscape photography, and we can achieve it in quite a few ways, which include using a long lens to get those kind of intimate shots right in onto the detail and onto the subject. But we can also do it by using light and contrast, and that's exactly what I've done in this shot here. This was taken on my journey up a Welsh mountain, and as I was walking up and hiking up, the sun came through a small gap in the mountain very momentarily and lit up this tree. And by lighting up the tree like it has done here, I've managed to use the contrast, the natural contrast in the image, to really make that subject stand out and isolated against the background. The light didn't last for long, and when it went away, this is what the scene looked like. So this is now just a very flat, there's no contrast, there's no light on the tree, and that tree just blends into that background, and the image is just completely lost and it doesn't work. So the next one is less is not always more. In fact, it's kind of contradictory, but it's about simplifying the image versus simplifying the story. So let's have a look at this image that I took in Glencoe. So at the time when I put this video out, I couldn't decide whether I liked this image better or the image where I've removed the road. And you can see just the road down in the bottom corner here. I've just cloned that out using Photoshop. I actually think in this image with the road removed, the composition is slightly better and it works slightly better. However, it's not simplifying the story. Although we've removed the road, made the image more straightforward and simple, it's complicated the story. It's done that by firstly pretty much deceiving the viewer about the image because there is a road there. It also removes the hint of the location where I am in Glencoe, and then most importantly, it just completely kills the scale of that shot, because if we then click back over to the road being there, it just gives just a sheer scale. The story just works a lot better with the road there. Beautiful winter's day in Glencoe gives scale to the mountain, and that is the story in that one. So this next one is a similar sort of thing. This is Roseby Topping in North Yorkshire, a place that's very, very special to me. And this image just sort of shows what a beautiful summer's day it is with that warm light. And the composition works really well because we have this leading line of the path just leading us around the scene up to Roseby Topping. And then if we follow this nice sort of triangular shape up to the sun, you get the sun setting as well. And I think it just creates a feeling that you're there in that quiet, special moment. Just to show an example of where removing things and making the image have less in it doesn't always work. And all I've done is just to show that, is just to crop out the heather at the bottom there. It's exactly the same image, just with that heather cropped out. And immediately the story is lost because it could be spring now. Is it summer? Is it spring? We don't know because we've lost that heather. We've also lost the leading line of the path. It's now a very distracting image because this is our subject up here. The lines kind of lead you over to the right hand side here and this light that's hitting the foreground here is just very distracting, and your view just does not naturally go up to Roseby Topping, and it just doesn't work anywhere near as well as having more detail in the image, more colour in the image, and that's all adding to it. So although sometimes we say less is more, that's not always the case because we're really talking about the story rather than removing things from the image. The next tip is to crop your images. Now, cropping is slightly controversial, but I don't think it's necessarily wrong in all cases, and I'll give you an example of that here. You hear a lot about getting it right in camera. I don't totally agree with that. However, I do agree with it around composition because it's really difficult to change your composition in post-processing other than cropping. You can't change perspective, you can't move your position, and as we saw in the video last week, that slightest of changes can completely change the image. But there are occasions, if you have captured the correct ingredients, cropping will work, and that results in that image just being quite good, or it gives you an idea and a good reason to revisit that scene and capture it with that new crop that you've discovered when looking at it on the screen. So this is a good example of that, and I've captured all the right ingredients but just haven't cropped it correctly. Now, I planned this shot for a long time and it paid off pretty much, but you see really most of the detail is in this area here, and you've got distracting elements here. This bit is distracting here, and all around the side is distracting, and then this bit of blue in the clouds at the top is also slightly distracting. So all I've done is cropped in pretty much from every side of the image, and this is the image it's created. It's just a much better composition, and it gives the story a much better feel because it's all about these cliffs leading you down the steepness down to this road that then leads you up with the cliffs at either side to what is just a spectacular sunset, and the sky is literally on fire. So that's an example of where you can go through your old images and apply these tips and essentially find an image in an image. Maybe you use that, or maybe it's just, like I say, a good reason to go back to that landscape and do it again. But try and improve the images you've got and then get out and try these tips for yourself in the field. So yeah, simplify your images. I could talk about this all day long. Check out my workshops. Please leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, do everything you need to do, and I will see you on another one very, very soon. I'm Adam. This is First Man Photography. Out.